It's not tenable to have 35+% tariffs on an industry like this. It's not tenable to have 50% tariffs on on an important sector like steel or aluminum or copper, because the inputs that go into the United States ultimately are then borne and paid for by American businesses, manufacturers, right, importers.
In early August 2025, across North America, the signs of a deepening trade clash are impossible to miss. In Windsor, auto workers wait to see if their jobs will survive the next round of policy shifts. In New York City, a family-run toy store closes after more than 4 decades. And in Washington, President Donald Trump signals no intention of easing his tariff campaign. Canada's response is not to retreat, but to reinforce, protecting key industries, supporting workers, and holding its ground in talks that could shape the continent's economic future. Former Canadian Minister of International Trade, Mary Ung, has called these 35% tariffs unsustainable for both sides. While they raise costs for Canadian exporters, the higher prices are ultimately paid by American manufacturers, importers, and consumers. She points to the deep integration of the North American supply chain. Over 90% of Canadian exports to the U.S. remain USMCA compliant and tariff-free, including autos and energy. Her position is clear. Canada should secure a good deal, not just any deal. Ottawa is also strengthening ties through the CPTPP and agreements with Europe and Asia to reduce reliance on the U.S. This diversification, combined with the ability to keep compliant trade flowing, gives Canada leverage at the negotiating table.
The Ford government has announced a $1 billion program to provide emergency loans to businesses in sectors hardest hit by U.S. tariffs.
We know businesses are facing tremendous uncertainty, and we will continue to protect Ontario's workers, businesses, and jobs from the impacts of U.S. tariffs.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford has rolled out a $1 billion Canadian emergency loan program under the Protecting Ontario Fund. It targets businesses in steel, aluminum, and auto manufacturing hit by U.S. tariffs. To qualify, companies must have at least 10 employees, $2 million in annual revenue, and must have already used federal tariff support programs. Loans range from $250,000 to $40 million, repayable within 6 years. The aim is to stabilize payrolls, facilities, and essential costs, preventing layoffs or closures. Ford pairs this with efforts to keep major automakers in Ontario by promoting tax cuts, GST reductions, and pressing the Bank of Canada to lower interest rates. It's an active defense of Ontario's industrial base rather than waiting for U.S. concessions.
On his 200th day in office, President Trump slapped new tariffs on dozens of countries around the world.
Most recent CBS News polls show that Americans increasingly believe the economy is good, but the majority expect prices to rise in the coming months.
U.S. companies, they're navigating these shifts in real time.
While Canada strengthens its position, the U.S. is seeing its own pressure points. One example featured on CBS Evening News is West Side Kids. 90% of its products came from China, leaving it exposed when new U.S. tariffs hit Chinese imports this summer. Already competing with online giants, the store could not absorb the added costs or the drop in consumer spending after the tariff announcements. It shut down permanently. Small businesses in the U.S. face this challenge nationwide. Without the buying power or storage capacity of large retailers, they are hit quickly by higher import costs. Many consumers pull back on spending as prices rise. The Yale Budget Lab estimates the 2025 tariff measures will cost American households an additional $2,200 to $3,800 per year, a burden that falls hardest on lower-income families. This latest tariff clash highlights two very different strategies. Trump is using economic pressure to push Canada toward his terms. Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney and with provincial leaders like Doug Ford, is countering with targeted support at home, active diplomacy, and a refusal to settle for a bad deal. Meanwhile, the fallout is visible in the U.S., where small businesses close and consumers face higher prices. This is more than a trade dispute. It's a test of endurance. Canada is signaling its readiness to withstand short-term strain to safeguard long-term gains, while Trump faces the question of whether his tariff strategy can deliver results before the costs at home become too high.
America is
the country that started the AI race. And as President of the United States, I'm here today to declare that America is going to win it.
When it comes to AI data centers, they are an order of magnitude more power hungry than the data centers we are used to since the internet age.
After August 1st, negotiations with China and Canada remained at a standstill. And Trump's latest tariff moves are now colliding with America's rising demand for energy and critical minerals to fuel its AI and manufacturing ambitions. Behind those headlines is a reality Trump can't afford to overlook. The United States relies heavily on Canadian supply, and in the race to lead in AI and semiconductor production, losing that connection would hurt Washington far more than Ottawa.
I think the biggest concern, and the one that the industry itself really needs to address, is the energy usage. That is just huge. The industry and the energy producers have got to figure that out. They've got to find a better way of providing that energy.
Trump's latest tariff push is now colliding with America's surging demand for energy, the same power needed to fuel AI data centers and bring semiconductor manufacturing back home. His proposal for a 100% tariff on imported chips is designed to pressure companies into building or investing in U.S. facilities. Apple, for example, pledged $100 billion in new American projects. That kind of industrial build-out comes with a hidden cost: electricity. In Virginia, home to the largest data center market in the world, Dominion Energy projects that demand could double over the next 15 years. AI data centers alone can draw more than a gigawatt on a single campus. And Virginia is only one example. Across the United States, from Oregon's server farms to Texas's tech corridors, AI data centers are multiplying, each requiring massive and continuous power. Furthermore, bringing semiconductor fabrication home will add to the load. All of it depends on reliable, large-scale energy supply. And that's where Canada's role becomes unavoidable.
So when I talk about being an energy superpower, I always say in both clean and conventional energies. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean oil and gas. It means using our oil and gas. It also means more exports, without question.
Canada is already America's largest energy supplier. According to 2024 trade data, the U.S. imported roughly 3.8 to 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude oil per day. Natural gas imports from Canada averaged about 8.5 billion cubic feet per day, up 7% from the year before. Electricity flows across the border totaled about 11.4 terawatt hours, enough to power roughly 1 million U.S. homes for a year. Uranium from Canada made up around 27% of total U.S. imports, the largest share of any country, sustaining a big part of America's nuclear fleet. On top of that are critical minerals.
We bring as interlocutors here all of the critical minerals of Ontario. So, for example, nickel. Nickel is something that comes from Ontario. It's high grade and it's not replaceable from other places in the world.
Ontario's high-grade nickel has no domestic substitute in the U.S. for certain defense and battery applications. British Columbia's germanium is essential for fiber optics, solar panels, and night vision systems. And the Teck smelter in Trail is the only Canadian source. These are not commodities that can be swapped in from other suppliers without years of supply chain adjustments. If these flows were disrupted, the ripple effects would be immediate. Industrial plants, data centers, and chip fabs would face higher costs and possible delays, and replacing Canada's unique mix of proximity, scale, and stability would be extremely difficult.
We can be an energy superpower, and we have all the components in nuclear, in hydro, in potentially in carbon capture and storage, which is going to be one of the determinants of competitiveness.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen not to rush into a deal. His strategy is to keep dialogue open, but refuse terms that would weaken Canada's long-term position. He's accelerating investment in domestic extraction and processing of energy and minerals, and reinforcing Canada's value to allies beyond North America. By signaling readiness to cooperate, but also the capacity to stand alone, Carney is making clear that Canada is not cornered. The message to Washington is that Canada's resources are a shared strength, but only if the partnership is respected. Pushing too far could backfire. Without Canadian energy and minerals, U.S. industries risk higher costs, slower growth, and greater dependence on less reliable partners. A dangerous prospect for an administration promising a manufacturing revival and AI leadership. In this mutual dependency, Canada holds leverage that matters more to U.S. stability than the other way around. And Trump must decide whether the price of sidelining Canada is worth any gains at the table.
About 55% of Indian exports to the U.S. are expected to take a hit from tariffs imposed by the Trump administration.
As expected, the White House has announced an increase on duties to Canadian softwood lumber.
But a lot of companies have signaled that price hikes aren't. How might this all look in a real person's life?
From the diamond on a finger to the wooden frame of a home, American consumers are paying the price for President Donald Trump's tariff politics. Since August 1st, his administration has pushed ahead with aggressive new trade measures, and they're hitting both luxury goods and everyday essentials. Two flashpoints stand out. A 50% tariff on Indian goods, including most of the diamonds entering the U.S., and a series of steep duties on Canadian exports, including softwood lumber, now taxed at over 35%. The White House frames these moves as leverage, a way to draw better deals for America. But the cost is landing in the laps of U.S. households, from engagement rings to new housing construction.
Right now, 90% of diamonds are manufactured in India, so cut and polished in India. That's not going to change in the near term. So a lot of this price increase will get passed on to the U.S. consumer.
India is the beating heart of the global diamond trade. Around 90% of the world's diamonds are cut and polished there, according to the Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council. In early August, the U.S. raised tariffs on Indian goods from 25% to 50%, citing India's continued purchases of Russian oil. In New York's Diamond District, the impact was immediate. Jewelers can't absorb that kind of cost. When the duty was at 10%, the industry could share the hit between suppliers and customers. At 50%, the math no longer works. Retail prices are expected to rise sharply heading into the holiday season, a time when jewelry sales normally peak. This comes on top of another factor. Gold prices are already at record highs, roughly double what they were just a few years ago. Together, these forces are pushing engagement rings and other fine jewelry further out of reach for many Americans. Some buyers are even considering traveling overseas to make purchases where tariffs don't apply. But that option is hardly realistic for most. The result is a squeeze on an industry that was already undergoing change, as lab-grown diamonds take a larger share of the market. The same kind of cost pressure is now emerging in America's trade with Canada. The clearest example is in softwood lumber. This month, Washington doubled certain duties, bringing the total rate on Canadian softwood to 35.19%.
Tariffs have added $6,000 to the cost of building a single-family home in the United States.
This is also going to make it next to impossible for Americans, middle-class Americans, to build their home.
That's not just a number on paper. The Ontario Forest Industries Association cites research showing it adds about $6,000 to the cost of building a single-family home in the United States. Canadian officials point out that these costs will fall hardest on middle-class families and on Americans rebuilding after disasters like wildfires and hurricanes. Ottawa isn't sitting idle, though. Just days before the U.S. announcement, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government unveiled a $1.2 billion Canadian support package for the industry, including $700 million Canadian in loan guarantees to keep mills running and $500 million Canadian to diversify markets and develop new products. From diamonds to lumber, Trump's tariffs are reshaping the American marketplace, making luxury items harder to afford and driving up the cost of everyday necessities. The Yale Budget Lab projects the 2025 tariff package could add thousands of dollars to the average household's annual expenses, tightening budgets nationwide. While Trump wields tariffs as a negotiation tool, Canada under Prime Minister Mark Carney is taking a steadier path, reinforcing its industries, keeping retaliation measured, and diversifying toward markets in Europe and Asia. The real test is whether these tariff politics will deliver lasting gains for the U.S. or simply leave Americans paying more while Canada holds its ground.